Platonists could say very easily, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. What they couldn't say is, and the Word became flesh.
Right.
I think we don't realize what a huge turning point that is in history.
We talk a lot on this podcast about secularism and the post-Christendom West. But secularism does not necessarily mean that people have become less spiritual. In fact, increasing numbers across the West describes themselves as spiritual but not religious. They have left religion, usually Christianity, in favor of self-defined, individualistic spirituality. Now, this trend may appear to be new, but Michael Horton aims to unveil its ancient pedigree in his new book, Shaman and Sage, The Roots of Spiritual but Not Religious in Antiquity, a book published by Erdman's. Horton is the J. Gresham Machen Professor of Systematic Theology and Apologetics at Westminster Seminary, California. In short, Mike wants us to see that what we call New Age spirituality wasn't invented by the flower-powered generation of the 1960s, but goes all the way back in Western civilization. Christian theism may be out by many, but it's not being replaced so much by atheism and agnosticism, but the occult. Michael Horton joins me now to explain. Welcome, Mike.
Hey, Collin, I wish that I had summarized the book that succinctly. I wouldn't have had all those pages. That's really
Well, we're going to hope to boil that down in this interview. It is a stimulating, but it is a dense read. You're dealing with some very complicated and unfamiliar, I think, to many listeners and viewers here. Certainly unfamiliar to me. You've done so many different things throughout a long and illustrious career. How long has this particular project been in the works for you?
Yeah, it really has been percolating for the last 35 years.
Wow.
It was when I was doing my PhD studies. I should have been paying attention to my PhD studies. I was going to other lectures by professors on philosophy of religion and history of religions, myth, scholars of myth, and just kind of getting into this because I was trying to understand what was already then a phenomenon of spiritual but not religious. People didn't call it that yet, but it was that phenomenon. You know, the people you meet on the plane, you probably people you maybe sit around the table with at dinner. It's increasingly the outlook of many people. So I wanted to understand that phenomenon. And there was a professor who was especially intriguing to me at the time. He was a professor at an evangelical theological college and was an evangelical theologian and then he became, not. So at Oxford, he was one of the most popular professors, and his lectures were packed with students who were eager to hear his next sentence. And the whole purpose of those lectures was showing that the mystical branches of the world's religions all sort of in a Venn diagram all meet in the middle. And it's at their mystical core that religions are one. Now, we've heard that a million times.
Right.
He did it in a very erudite way. And that really, I think, got me going because that in an academic fashion is what I've heard so much on the street.
So this has been through all the other work in systematic theology and elsewhere. This has just been percolating in the back for you?
Yes. Yeah, I have wasted all of my sabbaticals on this project. So I was always doing it in between the other projects, but yeah. But lately I just full board. This has been my focus for the last 10 years.
And 2 more volumes to come, is that right?
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier, I don't think a lot of the the listeners, the viewers here are going to be familiar with the sources that you cover. I think maybe this is the best way to ask the question, Mike. What is the main argument you're seeking to push back against? What's the counter argument?
Well, I guess the main one is that a lot of times I think even as Christians we may assume what secularists, the narrative that secularists assume, this march of history view, that basically that once upon a time we were pagan, then we were Christian, now we are losing our religion and turning to science, and atheism and agnosticism are on the march. But that's not what we're seeing. First of all, Christianity has always sort of been built on top of a pagan soil. And every now and again, that native paganism of the West erupts. I know soil doesn't usually erupt. That's got to change my metaphor there.
I got it.
Yeah, and so that's I wanted to trace those eruptions. I want to look back at those eruptions, and the more I did, the more I discovered that we're really what we're encountering today with this spiritual, not religious phenomenon. It is really a recurring phenomenon. It's like Mark Twain said, history doesn't exactly repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme. Yeah. And I want to look at the rhymes, and particularly this idea of the divine self. You can't look outside of yourself. You have to look inside yourself for your authority, for your beliefs, for your practices. I just follow that little light within, and that's a spark of divinity. So I trace the career of the divine self, and as I've done that, I've found, wow, even scientists are fairly mystical. Atheism and agnosticism are not. There's no upsurge when people leave evangelical Protestant churches. It's not that they are suddenly becoming members of the Humanist Association. They are becoming even humanists in America, as Harold Bloom said. Even humanists in America are Gnostics. So that's where people go. It's like G.K. Chesterton said, when people stop believing in the biblical God, it's not that they don't believe in anything, but they believe in anything and everything.
Yeah, right. Now, I assume the answers you've already given here are related to this question. You say that you don't really believe in modernity or postmodernity at all. Highlight that point a little bit more for us. Sure.
I'm not. I don't take great pains to defend this point, but I'm really impressed with the notion that Josephson Storm has argued that we only have modernity and postmodernity if we accept this march of history view, and so now we're going to another age, and even the periodization of three ages, this, that, and then another, ancient, medieval, modern, all of these sort of tendencies to break history down into three ages really has its roots in one of the guys who keeps popping up throughout this project, Joachim of Fior, spelled like Joachim.
Right.
And he was a 12th century mystic who came up with this idea that there are three ages: the age of the Father, which is law; the age of the Son, which is grace; and then the age of the Spirit that will make the new covenant as obsolete as the old. And when that happens, there won't be any church, there won't be any preaching, no sacraments, no ministers, and there won't be any state. Not only will there not be a visible church, there won't be a state. Everyone will finally live in a socialist utopia, a Christian monastery. The whole world will become a monastery. And everyone will know God immediately and directly, their own inner light. They will not have to rely on someone or something outside of them, including Scripture. That was very popular. I mean, his prophecies were widely embraced. People like Christopher Columbus, he thought his whole mission saw his whole mission in the light of fulfilling Joachim of Fiore's prophecies. John Cotton, Puritan New England leader. This was just Jonathan Edwards and George Whitefield. So this was pervasive across Roman Catholic and Protestant lines, and that eschatology fit really well with this history of the divine self, because it meant in that third age, at last we're going to attain enlightenment. At last we're no longer going to need tutors. We're not going to, it's Lessing's The Education of the Human Race. In fact, G.E. Lessing begins his book, The Education of the Human Race, by referring to Joachim of Fiore and his followers and saying they were right about the thesis, but wrong about the dating. We hadn't come along yet.
This almost sounds like tritheism in some sense.
It was judged as tritheistic by the Fourth Lateran Council.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's do some more clarification here. You're helping us make a lot of progress already here, Mike. What's the Axial Age?
Yeah, it's interesting. There are some people. Well, first of all, what is it? In short, the 6th century before Christ was a really catalytic century, because you have the rise of Hinduism as we know it. You have the rise of Buddhism, Jainism, Zoroastrianism, and at this time you have the Hebrew prophets warning against superstition and idolatry. It also happens to coincide with the rise of the Achaemenid Empire, the Persian Empire, stretching from India all the way to Eastern Europe, and from what's now Ukraine all the way down to Egypt. So this was just a massive empire, and it's within the boundaries of that empire that you have the rise of these more philosophical religions. So religion used to be about feeding the gods, care and feeding of the gods, making sure that you leave milk and cookies out for the gods so that everything will go well with you, sort of health, wealth, and happiness. And people didn't think of themselves as individuals. They did these public political rites to keep the city safe. So the gods would keep them safe. Now you have more philosophical religions, and instead of polytheism, you many gods, it starts becoming more amorphic. You have the one. You have now this isn't monotheism. It is not a personal God. It's the all, the one and all that we're all a part of. We emanate from this great all, Brahman. All is Brahman, Brahman is all. And you find across the East and the West many similar movements and trends. And in the West, it's called Orphism. And so now all of these ideas are contested, and I explore the upsides and downsides of using these terms. But pretty much the scholarship, there is a consensus that in the 6th century BC, some really big stuff happened, and there were some general trends, especially so this Orphism is the idea that the divine part of us, our soul, is trapped in a body. Oh. And because we're paying the penalty for crimes we've committed in past lives, so you have the doctrine of reincarnation, and we're going to go through these reincarnations till we get it right, karma and all that. There are Western versions of it, Plato has it all over, and Plato himself refers to Orphic tradition. He relies on it as if it were scripture. And so in this first volume, I really explore what this Orphic phenomenon is, how deep it goes. And, it's really still the philosophy on the street, Collin. It's still pretty much what people, so deep down, I have this divine spark.
That's what I was just going to ask, Mike. So maybe are there other examples from these philosophical religions, certain dogmas, practices, rituals that go back more than 2,500 years, but we think are new?
Yes. Well, part of it is they weren't as ritualistic as the religions they grew out of. For them, it was much more, theology became philosophy, ritual became contemplation, meditation. There were techniques and steps for transcending the body and transcending the visible world. It all became much more philosophical, less ritualistic. And there are plenty of examples of how this played out. I think one of the large, significant ways it played out, as I said, was Plato. Plato says, well, our goal in life is to flee the body as soon as we can. You know what I'm talking about. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. That's what the sacred writings say. The Hieros Logos sacred writings, which when he quotes them, sometimes he even says the Orphics. So it's not making this up. It's actually in there. Ancients used to call what we call ancient Greek philosophy Orphic mystagogy or Orphic mysteries.
Well, let's take a bit of a turn here, and this is going to be a big question. But
yeah, because the others weren't.
Yeah, that's a good point. Oh my goodness. But this one, it relates a lot to the work that I do, and it was a question just popped up as I'm engaging with your work. How much credit does Christianity deserve for inventing the West versus religious and philosophical developments that predate the incarnation of Christ? I think you can see how this follows from some of the arguments that you're making. I don't think in your book you engage with Joseph Henrich at Harvard as an example here in human evolutionary biology, but he would seem to posit more discontinuity between the pre- and post-Christian Western civilization. How do your arguments relate?
Right. This is not generally, a history of Christianity. It's really a history of Christianity's other.
Yeah, right.
The Christianity's dancing partner throughout the ages, and so I'm not really looking as much at the history of Christianity. Interestingly enough, that's what I'm more interested in. So if I did look at that, I would want to see more connections than I assume in this project. I think that that basically this comes back to the question of what is the relationship of Jerusalem and Athens? Right. What is the relationship of the church to the academy? That famous question that Tertullian asked, he answered by saying, aren't all the heresies from the philosophers? And he especially singled out Plato. But we've also formulated our doctrines, our Christian doctrines, with philosophical terminology. And so we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Philosophy is an important handmaid to theology. And so what happens periodically throughout history, though, is that the more philosophical sects within Islam, Christianity, and Judaism sort of meet together at the Hilton and come up with all kinds of philosophical mysteries that they want to solve. And what gets revived is usually Neoplatonism. This Orphic, sort of almost Gnostic outlook. And they're saying, well, this is just a higher doctrine. Sure, we are Muslims or we're Jews or we're Christians, but there is a higher doctrine at this higher point, sort of like a pyramid. We're all united. You get the diversity down at the bottom, diversity over different historical claims and rituals and so forth. But at the top, the philosophical peak, we really agree. And what are the doctrines always at the top? They're always these fundamental Orphic doctrines. And so I think one of the goals of this project is to make Orphism actually something that we see, because usually we assume it so much that we don't even talk about it. It's not even on our radar because it's in our blood. But to take it out, look at it, unpack it, and examine the ways in which maybe our own thinking is shaped by this outlook. And then to see that, there are all sorts of places where Christianity has interacted with, engaged with, flowed in and out of philosophical thought. That's just, living in your culture. But that's different from the takeover by this philosophical religion that we see periodically through history. The Renaissance is a good example. Ficino and Pico della Mirandola, the founders of the Italian Renaissance, explicitly revived by name this Orphic religion and even the Orphic rites. Ficino was a priest, so that was a problem. But you could evidently put Christianity and even Orphic ritual practice together, the way many people do today. It's even ordained clergy sometimes play with their Ouija board at night.
Well, now I'm going to ask a question that's probably not fair, because God's providence works in inscrutable ways, and the Lord Jesus Christ was incarnate at a specific place and a specific time, according to the plan throughout all the ages. But would it make a difference if Christ had come pre-Orphic? I mean, would Christianity look really different if that had been the case? At least in how it was practiced and conceived at those philosophical levels subsequently? Or is that not a question that's appropriate?
Yeah, no. I mean, I think it's a great question. I don't know that I have any answer to that, but I do think that it matters that when Jesus was born, obviously, as you say, God's providence is intentional, at a time when it actually, not when it would resonate with the world, but when it would clash the most with the world's way of thinking. A Platonist could say very easily, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. They could say that's the Logos, that's the demiurgic intellect. But the One, the source of everything, is God, and so the demiurge is divine, but it below God. But they could at least say that sentence, understanding it in their own way. What they couldn't say is, and the Word became flesh.
Yeah, right.
And that's what Augustine said. Augustine said he pored over the writings of the Platonists. But he says, one thing about the Platonist books I never found was the saying, and the Word became flesh. I think we don't realize what a huge turning point that is in history. Well, it gives birth, really, a lot of people have argued, to the whole idea of history, with promise and fulfillment instead of the cyclical view of history that you get in philosophical religions. So I think it's and also it's Jewish. It's the fulfillment of the promises made to Israel.
Because, of course, the phrase there is that he tabernacled among us.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. So, and it's interesting, Paul uses Stoic phrases. In him, all things hold together. In Christ, all things hold together. But he just uses that language for something that no self-respecting Stoic would ever say. Yeah. And I just find that really interesting.
Yeah. Well, let's go a different angle here. Back in 2017, you and I did a book together on Charles Taylor. You wrote an essay that pushed back on his critique of the Reformation. For that book, Our Secular Age, 10 Years of Reading and Applying Charles Taylor. How does Shaman and Sage advance or challenge his thesis of secularism? I have a feeling how you're going to answer. I've seen you write elsewhere, quote, "We have always been enchanted, most of all when we hear laments of disenchantment." So I suspect you have some critiques. Go ahead.
I do. I think, so first of all, we have to ask, what do we mean by enchantment? And I think if I read Charles Taylor correctly, and you can help me with this if you think otherwise. As I read him, enchantment is pretty much understood the way Max Weber understood it, as a feeling of fullness, a feeling of this not being everything, that there's something that transcends me and my material satisfaction.
Yeah, it's cannot reducible to the material, basically.
Yeah, transcendence. And the problem is, spirituality without religion is always very transcendent.
Yeah.
We think the search for the sacred, when we see that on the cover of a magazine, oh, great, the world is going for the sacred. Well, that usually means a lot of Protestants and Catholics are becoming New Agers.
Yeah, it's still about the self. It's still about the self.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that Charles Taylor, he's coming from a more liberal Catholic orientation. He likes frankly, the sort of mixture of Christianity and paganism.
He loves the rituals.
Yeah.
He hates the theology, but he loves the rituals.
Exactly. And original sin is a boogeyman for him in that book. I think the biggest problem I have with Taylor's account is when he talks about enchantment, he means the pagan Western pre-Christian, even non-Jewish heritage over the Judeo-Christian one. Now, he's very specific about this when he says that what has caused disenchantment began with the Hebrew prophets, with their screeds against idolatry and superstition and magic, and then it reached its apex in the Reformation.
And Calvin, he hates thoroughgoing religion. When it's inside, when it's internal, when it's theology firmly believed and affects all of your life, that's what he hates.
Yes, exactly. And it's so really, if you pull the thread in Taylor's own In a Secular Age, he goes after the Reformation, and I disagree with how he characterizes the Reformation, but he takes it all the way back to the Hebrew prophets. And this is the thing: enchantment in our time means non-Judeo-Christianity. Yeah. It means we don't like the as they call him, the Father Sky God. Yeah. We don't like the ethical accountability. We don't like creation ex nihilo. We like that we're made out of God stuff. but that we're not made by God, for God, and that we are sinners, we're fallen, and we can't get up. We have to be redeemed, we have to be rescued by this God. We don't like any of that by nature. And that is part of the Abrahamic inheritance. I mean, it goes all the way back to, so there's a real pushback among enchanters, a real pushback. If you scratch enough, it bleeds anti-biblical orientation. That's really what it is. It's not that they're anti-spiritual, but they're really opposed to the God of Abraham.
You say Alexandria is our departure city, Florence is the connection city, and Las Vegas is the destination. Now, I love that imagery, but tell us what it means.
Well, yeah, Alexandria. Nietzsche said all of our philosophy was invented in ancient Alexandria. He's absolutely right. I mean, that's where basically these Orphic movements gained a lot of traction. They were percolating together. So you had the rise of Christianity, and then you had Gnosticism and Hermeticism, which is a whole nother deal, magic, and then you had the rise of Neoplatonism, all there in one city.
Yeah, well.
And they all knew each other. They'd meet each other at the shopping mall, and the great Alexandrian library. There was a lot of interaction. So even some Christians became Gnostics. Some Gnostics became Christians. Some Hermeticists became Christians. So on. Origen, for example, the not so reliable church father Origen, was a student of Plotinus at the famous of Ammonius Saccas, a fellow pupil with Plotinus under Ammonius Saccas, the founder of Neoplatonism. So there's a lot of interaction back and forth between these folks. So I follow the trail from Alexandria to the various renaissances of this configuration, this constellation of influences. Just almost as the same groups in Alexandria percolates and comes together again in the Renaissance, and then it percolates and comes together in our modern culture. And Vegas just happens to be where the as one writer said, the American soul crawled off to die, and everything is artificial and immanent, but in a transcendent kind of way.
Wow.
So,
It's a good way to put it. Also sounds like something somebody'd say who lives in California.
Well, there you go.
The imagery works especially well from there. The long crawl from Alabama. Mike, let's wrap up with a couple of questions here. What difference do you hope this book will make?
I hope it will reorient our understanding. It's not a polemical book. I hope that people can come away and say, okay, I've got to rethink some of my categories and the way I have been thinking about this phenomenon of spiritual but not religious and the history of it all. I've got to rethink that. I don't expect people to say after reading it, oh, I want to become a Christian, because I want to write that book later. But what I'm trying to do here is just really lay out a different interpretation of the history than I've seen out there, so that's my goal.
Yeah, and then you've alluded to this a little bit already. What can we expect? And I guess when can we expect the next two volumes?
The second volume, Lord willing, will be out in about 9 months. Okay. It's already into the publisher.
Okay.
And that one really focuses from the Renaissance to the scientific revolution.
Okay.
And then the third volume picks up there and focuses quite a lot on Romanticism and Hegel, Marx, Nietzsche, Freud, that whole trajectory, and closes with a fun chapter on this meeting that has gone on since the 1920s to the current day, to our time, on what is called the Mount of Truth in Ascona, Switzerland, with many of the pioneers of modern physics and mathematics and computer technology, as well as the Jewish Gnostic scholar Gershom Scholem, Paul Tillich, the liberal theologian, Ernst Troeltsch, Max Weber. You go down the list, and these people all met to recover Gnosticism and even to engage in Gnostic rituals. And it's like, okay, this is what I'm talking about.
So I think you just answered my last question, which was just sitting up here because I was thinking that your previous answer, and I thought, how am I going to teach differently now? And I probably would have followed some of the sociologists, especially Robert Bellah. I probably would have looked and put more emphasis on the individualistic turn, the turn toward the self. I mean, look, let me get that out of Reif and McIntyre as well. So is the best way to say it then that, yes, there was a movement in that direction from, the post-war period, but you're arguing basically it was a deliberate recovery of the Gnostic tradition? Is that what you're arguing?
Well, no, a lot of this isn't deliberate.
Okay.
We don't even know. It's so much part of us in our blood that we don't even know what it is.
Okay.
But no, I would call it an intensification.
Okay.
It's always there.
It's always there.
The individualism has always been there.
So it's kind of, it's a Jerusalem, Athens thing going, a city of man, city of God thing, kind of going along the whole way?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. So there are just times when it might swing one way or another, and since the post-war period, we've been in a swing back.
Exactly. There's a time when one of the partners is leading the other.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think a lot of this is where my work often comes in. A lot of the technologies are both produced out of that outlook and facilitate the living of that outlook.
Right.
Yeah, which would make sense out of all the tech movements coming out of California as well, and why there's an overlap between the New Age spiritualities and the technologies.
Huge. Okay. In fact, the transhumanism movement is, I've gone through a lot of their writings for this third volume. It's amazing how Gnostic they are. Yeah. They talk about, this, we're going to upload our consciousness from this inferior body, this meat, they call it. It's sort of like a hyper Cartesian view of the self that you get in this transhumanist movement.
Well, you've really connected a lot of dots here for me, Mike, not only in your writing, but then especially just in this conversation. Michael Horton's been my guest on Gospelbound. The book is Shaman and Sage, The Roots of Spiritual But Not Religious in Antiquity. You can look for Volume 2 soon, followed by Volume 3. Mike, thanks for a fascinating conversation.
Thank you, Collin. Always good to be with you.